This isn't a car video, this is a sewing video. We are going to be making that one. I'm using a very old machine, but this has been a workhorse. Go in and out with your fabric like this. So a slightly curved hem on the collar. Future me, just popping in, I managed to accidentally delete all the footage on the buttonholes on this shirt, so I'm going to show you how to do that now. I can't show you with the same fabric I used before, because I had none left, so I'm going to be using some different fabric, but it is an important part of putting the shirt together, and it's a fairly easy skill to pick up. So I'm going to just move the camera and then I'll show you what I'm doing on this sample. These are the materials we're going to use. This is just some curtain lining fabric. I think it's a polycotton. And I'm just using it to substitute the look and feel of the cuffs on the shirt. It's roughly the same. I'm using a contrast thread on this because I actually want you to see the stitches. And when I did the footage before, the stitches blended in just a little bit too well. I'm using just some generic plastic buttons, nothing too special. One of these, which cheap, easy to get hold of, last forever. And some good sharp scissors. Also some pins. I'm just going to be doing one button today. There's no point doing more than that because this is just a little sample. The first thing you want to do is figure out where your button's going to go. So we're just doing a sample, so we'll pretend that this is the shirt and we'll just plonk the button down wherever we're going to put it. I mark the buttonholes by putting a pin in each side of the button itself, and that means that the buttonhole is exactly the right size for the button. Depending on the kind of buttons you've got, if you've got a domed button you might need a slightly larger hole. If you've got a very thin button, sometimes you want a very tight fit. But this is okay for most buttons, and this is an average thickness shirt button, so this method will work for most buttons. Once you've marked where your buttonhole is going to go, you want to take your sharp pointy scissors, push the point through the fabric, and you cut in a straight line between the two pins. And then before you sew anything, get the button you want to put through and actually just make sure it goes through the buttonhole, which it does. You want it to be fairly tight because when you actually put the stitches in, it tends to open the buttonhole up a little bit. Next, you want to thread a needle. As I've said, we're using this contrasting colour thread so you can see what I'm doing. I've doubled the thread through the needle so that we end up with a loop on one end. And when I do buttonholes, I prefer to start, take the pins out now, don't use those. I prefer to start at a corner and work my way around. So the loop on the end of the needle means that you go through from one point of the buttonhole I'm still getting the hang of doing hand sewing on camera. It's challenging. So pull your thread through until you've got some of the loop left, then bring your needle back through the loop and just pull the thread. And that ties on your thread. There's no bulky knot or anything there. That's one of the easiest ways I've found of actually starting your thread. There are a number of different buttonhole threads. I'm using a very, very simple one here today. So go through the fabric, and all we're going to do is every stitch we do, you come back through the loop and pull it tight. It's basically a blanket stitch. If you use an embroidery floss, which is what I used on the shirt, you do get a slightly nicer finish. The thread being a bit thicker does help. I'm just going to change this angle and see if I can get a better shot of this for you. Okay, let's see if this angle works a bit better. So, every stitch you do, you want to be as close as you can to the stitch before, and you want to try and keep the length of the stitches that you're putting in as even as possible. Especially if you're doing a contrast colour, because you want the decorative element of it. So I definitely recommend, when you're starting out doing buttonholes, do it in as close a match as you can to the original fabric that you're using, because any bad stitches, like any unevenness, is going to disappear. And the reason that we use this particular stitch, this blanket stitch, is one, it's quick, and it makes doing the buttonholes a lot less stressful, since you're having to spend less time doing them. And the other is it's nice and strong. Each stitch is basically a knot in its own right, so you don't end up with them coming undone. When you get round to the corner, there's a number of different ways you can do this. Generally you use a lot more stitches on the corners, because you've got a lot more ground to cover, as it were. Your inside point is going to be hardly anything, but your outside edge you've got to go all the way around. You can, with different stitches and different techniques, make the end of your stitches round, which can make it easier to put the buttons in. But again, we're not doing that, we're just keeping it nice and simple here. And just working our way around. Until we're all done. Oops, I think I just didn't go through that loop. Also, if you don't go through one loop, don't worry about it too much, just make sure you do another one straight away, where you do go through the loop. Normally I'd be holding this a lot closer to my face as well, which does make it a lot easier. I don't tend to hand sew at arm's length. So if my stitches are a little bit wonky at the end of this, that's why. Here we go, back at the start. And to finish off, I go through. It's a bit trickier with this thread because this is very, very thin thread, it's not suitable really. But yeah, go through a few of the stitches that you've put in. And then go through half of those stitches. It's best if you do this on the reverse side as well. And go through the loop on your last one, and that just secures it. Trim off your thread. And there you have a slightly messy buttonhole. But it works. As you can see. And then your other half of the buttonhole, of course, is doing the button itself. So we cast on, that's knitting, that's for another video maybe. You start with the buttonhole by getting your thread attached. Now we've got no loop this time, so rather than going through the loop, you leave a little tail, go back through the fabric, pick up the loop before you pull everything tight, and then pull it all tight afterwards. And I do this twice, which just makes sure that the thread's nice and secure. And then you sew the button on however you fancy. I'm just going to do this one a little bit quick, just to demonstrate the buttonhole really. And I do cover this in more detail later in the video. I'll just go through a couple of times. Through. Go around the buttonhole to make a little neck. Basically to give the fabric somewhere to go. And snip off the extra. So, you've got your button and your buttonhole. And there you go. As simple as that. And because you've made the buttonhole quite so small, they do stretch a little bit over time, not very much. So that squeakiness you heard as the button went through, that will go away with a couple of washes and a couple of wears. And you don't get much of the buttonhole visible. So don't worry if your stitches aren't perfect. It really won't matter, because the only person that's really ever going to see this buttonhole is going to be you. But that's how easy buttonholes are by hand. They're not actually that daunting. It's only when you get onto the really, really fancy versions that it can be difficult. Right, back to the rest of the video. Let's see where we're at. And we're back. Now then, I haven't done the cuffs yet. They will get buttonholes but no buttons, because I will always wear this shirt with cufflinks. Saves you a bit of time. I've got all of the buttonholes done on the front, including the one on the cuff, the one on the collar even. I suppose it's a cuff for your neck. I've got the 4 buttons on the placket done, and we just have the one left to go on the collar. And as you can see, I'll show you one that's a bit easier to see. The buttons go through quite nicely and do up quite well. And this is why you don't really need to worry about the quality of your stitching, because you can't really see it when the button's on, so as long as it's moderately even, and mine's okay, you don't need to worry about it. All the buttonholes are really there for, they're not there to look pretty, they're there to hold the buttons on. Well yeah, they are to do that, they're also to stop the fabric from fraying, which linen likes to do a lot. So, I've already marked out where this one goes with the pin, and I mark it so that point where the pin goes in is where the button needs to be. And you'll see with the other ones it's roughly in line with the middle of these ones. They do wander a little tiny bit as you do them, but again, don't worry about that too much. So that's where this one will go. This button's a slightly different colour to the other ones, so I thought it'd be a good idea to put that one on the collar. So, to start with, I don't have a loop on this. This is a thread that I started on this buttonhole. Button. Keep muddling those two up. So, you go through your fabric and leave a little tail, and then you go through again and thread your needle back through this loop. Now when you pull this tight, be careful you don't lose that little tail, because that allows you to keep the tension on the stitch like that. And when you pull, you can see that the little tail there doesn't go away. And then you can thread your button on. There are a lot of different ways to do buttons. This is just the way I learned to do it years ago, and it's always worked for me, so this is the way I do it. Modern buttonholers, they don't tend to do this X-type stitch. They kind of do a more of a box kind of a stitch. I don't like machine sewn buttons. They have a habit of coming undone. A number of off the rail clothing I buy, where I've had to actually sew the buttons back on within a couple of weeks. Incredibly annoying. So, as you're stitching, always remember when you're doing the cross type, you go through 2 opposing loops, 2 opposing holes, and then come back and do the other ones, and just repeat that. This gives you a nice strong stitch. So if ever it does break a thread, it's only going to undo 1. Now I'm not showing you the back because I don't need to see it. I tend to feel with the needle, or like you fold the button back on the fabric and you can poke the needle through and then line it up with the hole. On the back you just end up with a few small stitches. Now if you've got a very delicate fabric, one thing you can do is use a small button on the back and you go through both buttons simultaneously, and that then allows you to take a lot of stress off the fabric, because it's not just pulling on the thread, it's spreading it out on the button like a washer. I go through about 3 times, as we've seen here, and then I bring the needle back up as close as I can to the stitches, and with the length of thread you've got, you just go round the button, the stitches, and pull it fairly tight as you go, and this makes a little stem on the back. Now depending on how much thread you've got, how strong you want it, how long a stalk you want, 3 to 6 goes round is usually plenty. To actually make this stronger, I then go through the fabric just behind the stitching, and we go through the loop before you pull it tight, and when you pull it tight, that effectively ties it in place. Do this a couple of times and then it shouldn't come undone. Sometimes they do, all depends on the thread and all that sort of business. So once you've done that, snip the thread off, and your button's done, nice and secure. I'll just button this up and you can see how that all looks. I'm really glad I went with these natural shell buttons. I did have a lot of choices in the box, quite a few plastic buttons, but these shell ones just look right against the linen. They're quite nice. And there you go, that's all the buttons on. So I will repeat the buttonhole process on the cuffs, so I've got 4 more buttonholes to go, and then this shirt will be finished and I'll be able to show you what it looks like actually on a person. Let's put the shirt on. Here it is on its own, so you get an idea of the fit, and it is very, very comfortable. I'm very happy with this. Now with a paisley print cotton cravat that I made some time ago, just casual sort of lounging around. Again, very, very comfortable. And those big gaudy 70s cufflinks I love. Here more formal with a fitted tweed jacket and a tweed waistcoat, a pocket handkerchief and the collar up with the cravat over it. The neckline on the waistcoat is a little low for this look. And just the same outfit without the jacket so that you can see how the shirt fits in relation to the waistcoat And here with some more modern items, a 1980s striped blazer, a 1970s striped tie and the collar down in the more modern way. Quite a successful project. Thanks for watching.